I've got an impossible job because I'd like to talk to you about what's happening to the children in this country, but I can't talk to you about what's happening because everything is done under secret courts. And the UK column newspaper already has 4 injunctions out to stop us telling you what's being done with the children. It's a good system, isn't it? You're doing something wrong, so you run a secret court and then you hide it. And I'll tell you a bit more about it. If this little pointer works, and we're not sure, doesn't seem to like it too much. Basically, in the picture, we've got our families looking a bit dejected, but behind them, things are going on very high level, and that's Portcullis House in Westminster, which is the new seat of power for our MPs. If you ever go in there, you'll find it quite interesting because you're surrounded by armed guards. Okay, this is the UK column, and the one on the left-hand front page is a new edition, which has been put together by Mike Robinson, who has recently joined us. He's been doing the website for a while, but to take some pressure off me, produced this edition, which has gone down extremely well. And I've decided to put Mandelson there, is that when our newspaper came on the streets, people began to talk to us about things going on. And one of the early ones that came up was stories about children. I didn't believe them initially because they sounded too far-fetched, until the first mother arrived in our offices carrying about 4 ring binders of documents, court documents, transcripts. And the story that unfolded, which I will touch on, was just incredible. And the crime which I've listed there, this is absolutely correct. False evidence, false documentation, perjury in court, bullying and threats by the judiciary, the police, the social services. Everything you can think of in order to put pressure on the parents. Can be the father, but very often they tend to go for the mother. Now, if anybody is sitting thinking, I am a social services person or I am a policeman, etc., it's shades of grey. I am not standing here saying that everybody who works from social services is bad, and I'm not saying that for the police or the courts. However, the body of evidence says that within these public sectors, we now have criminal and corrupt activity on a very big scale, and it needs to be exposed and pretty quickly. What are they doing? Well, basically, they're breaking up families. They're breaking up mums and dads. They're getting the children away from the parents. And when those children are away, they can be used for things. They can be used for drug testing. If they die as a result of an illness or circumstances in hospitals, then body parts are disappearing. And otherwise, they can go into a more or less a gulag system where they can be abused. And some of that came out on the BBC a while ago when a very brave lady spoke out about her abuse in a children's home where she was tied down and systematically raped. Although she's got the evidence, and other girls and boys who were abused have got the evidence, they cannot get justice. Because when they go to the police or they go to social services or they go to the courts, their pathway to justice is blocked. And I mean blocked, totally and utterly. And in the last resort, threats will be used to get them to back down. Now, these are some of the statistics. I'm going to be thanking a man called Ian Joseph a bit later on, who's done a huge amount of work in a book, which I'll show you the cover of. So some statistics have come from him and some I've researched, but this is factual. 25,000 children a year are now disappearing into the system. And we ask why, and we ask what's happening, and we ask who are these people who are now more qualified to say how you should look after your children than you are. My 2 children are adult, so I've moved on a bit. But any of you who've got younger children or you've got grandchildren, I can tell you those children are not safe. It doesn't matter what school they go to. Social services in that area have the power to take those children if they so wish. Now, these are some of the headlines that we've had in the paper. I've only picked a few because there's so many. Social services being described as the Stasi, that's come up several times. The father who was asked to donate organs to his son, but he wasn't allowed to see his son at all. Even judges, and there are good judges out there, but they're pretty lacking in backbone, are talking about foul play. And then the two cases down at the bottom, we're starting to get into something very sinister, because people are now saying, you're really not bright enough to have children of your own. Who says? Who makes this decision? Because that was the start of the eugenics program, selective breeding. And for those of you that think eugenics came out of the Nazi Party, it didn't. It came out of the Tavistock Institute in London. It's a British problem, and it was exported to the Nazis. Now, the key thing, if we say who benefits, which is a great way to start a trial, it's pretty easy, because everybody who touches a child who's taken away by social services is raking in the money. Legal profession tops. The industry of taking children into care, we know at the moment, is about £20 billion worth. Billion. £70,000 a day if an illegal team really gets stuck into it. 3,000 a day. Medical experts, therapists, and then we've got the homes, £7,000 a week. Now, a lot of morality disappears out the window pretty quickly when money appears. And in my opinion, linking huge payments of money with children is itself the start of a recipe for disaster. And yet, at the moment, we, the general public, are not told the detail. You don't read it in the newspapers, and the reason is that the newspapers are gagged, just like the UK column is. If you take it a step further, there have been targets in place where the government says to a local authority, we'll give you even more money if you can get more children put into care. So this is just a summary of the amounts paid to various councils for meeting their government set targets for adoption. And it's big money. If you're a county council or a city council and your budget is under pressure, to be able to take in £500,000 a year by putting children into the system is pretty easy picking. So we have now put a price on our children's heads. And if you think, and I'll keep stressing this, if you think because of your social position or your knowledge or your intelligence or because you're a good person that these people are not capable of taking your child away, you are absolutely wrong. I'm sorry it's such a subject for 9 o'clock in the morning, but we need to deal with it, because if we don't, we've lost control of our society. Now, this is one of the key things with social services. They are a law unto themselves. So wherever they're situated, they've got their own links through local authorities and into government and through the police and through into the secret courts. And those courts are secret. The public is not allowed in. The press are not allowed in. And even though Mr. Straw was recently boasting that there would be more openness, he was actually cheating you, because what he was saying is there would be more openness on the decisions, not on how the court proceedings actually made those decisions. I think he lied. Try and think of it this way. We've got social services who've got tremendous power. They can take a human being away from its parents, and they can then hold that child totally away from family until the child is 18, by which case, in many cases, the child has been turned against their own parents, his own parents. Now, how can social services get away with this? Well, it's to do with the fact that they aren't accountable to any normal regime. So in the diagram there, we've got the fact that social services, even within a local authority, are not accountable to normal democratically elected councillors. In Neathport Talbot, which I'll mention later, I can tell you that counsellors have tried to ask questions about a disgraceful incident with a young girl, and they've been told you're not entitled to know because of child and family confidentiality. So the people we elect as counsellors to keep track on what's happening cannot penetrate their own social services. And if they do, very often the legal officer in the council will put them under pressure. And a common bullying tactic is that they then use the scrutiny committees and public standards in public office to put pressure on the counsellors. How do I know this? Because of the cases that I've assisted with, but also due to the counsellors talking to me. They hide directly behind the secrecy of the family courts. And those courts themselves can then be used to gag people. So you get too close to the truth, whoomph, in comes the injunction. What does an injunction look like? Well, I've got 4 sitting on my desk, but I can't show you because the injunction says that I'm not even allowed to show you the injunction, which puts me under a gagging order. But in the box with the red language is allegedly part of an injunction. I couldn't confirm that, of course. But you get the idea. So a fairly nominal judge, a district judge, can come out with a gagging order which is UK-wide on every means there is of getting information out. TV, press, radio, pamphlets. And they mean what they say because people have been put in prison for trying to tell the story. So we've got a secret regime set up in the middle of our councils. It can take children, it does take children, and then when you try and expose it, when the mothers try and expose it, you're in big trouble. Now what I want to do is get you thinking broader, because when you read the articles in the paper, you say, well, they must have done something wrong. There must have been something wrong with the mother or the father, or, yeah, there's got to be something there. Well, I'm going to start to suggest to you, although in some cases there is something there, in other cases we are seeing this as part of something much bigger and much nastier. Now, I don't know whether you know about this, but children are to be data-based, and there's 3 basic databases. There's the contact point, there's a social services database, and there's going to be a special one for special elitist people, because we are heading for a dictatorship where there will be an elite, and then there'll be other people. So there's a special database for the children of MPs and celebrities, so that we don't get too close to their children. Fingerprinting in schools. How many know it's going on in your area? Can you put a hand up if you know? Well, you need to start digging because it's happening in all areas. Sometimes it's done as a game. Sometimes it's done through the mouse in the libraries. But 3 more schools in Plymouth this week are adopting fingerprints even for going into lessons. Now, even Nick Clegg, who's not a friend of mine because he doesn't tell the truth about the European Union, even he saw it was dangerous. And this was a statement he made in 2007 saying it was sinister. That's his words, sinister. Have you heard him speak out on it since then? No, because the Lib Lab Con means that all 3 major parties are helping to insert this type of thing into society. The SS, social services, very, very secretive. And we discovered this little thing going on here with a program produced by Siemens, which is going to look at risk with IT systems and data. They do it for NATO, they do it for the British government. I'm told by a source that includes MI5, that's interesting. But they're also now going to do it for your children. And in case you don't know, if you travel on the trains a lot, when you go to a station and you are now CCTV'd from the moment you go in, and on some cases, in some companies you're actually CCTV'd while you're sitting on the train, a lot of that is run by Siemens. So we now have a German company, I'm sure it's a wonderful, kind, benevolent company, now beginning to monitor not only the British public on a day-to-day basis, but they're now working with social services and they're getting close to our children. Even Germans themselves will tell you they are getting very nervous about seeing things which they'd seen in the past start to re-emerge. Well, let's have a look at people. So who's pulling the strings? I've only got an hour, so I can't go through them all, but I'm going to give you an idea. And this lady, Harriet Harman's very interesting. Do you all know Harriet? Yes? She was fined, I think, a while ago for speeding. Well, she said that last year, something like 200 people went to prison through secret courts. That's a very interesting statement, isn't it? Something like. That little bit tells you she's not really interested in how many. But I'm pretty interested in how many people are sent to prison after going through a secret court, because if it's one, the next person could be me, or it could be you. This is very dangerous stuff, because the public has no track as to what's happening with people. And if you look at dictatorships, this is the route for putting people in gulags. We're not used to this sort of stuff in Britain because we've had a democracy which has worked pretty well for so long. But if you talk to people in Russia or Poland or Germany, they know it can happen. And what I'm going to say to you this morning, and I don't get any pleasure because I'd rather tell you a joke or something, is it's happening here. But it's creeping. It's piece by piece by piece. So if we look at this lady a bit more, and this was a photograph which I liked because it's of her when she was younger. When she was younger, she was involved in the Council for Civil Liberties, top right-hand corner of the box. And she was the legal officer. Now that organisation is now Liberty and run by a lady called Chakrabarti. Do you all know it? It's all about liberties. However, at one stage, the government was proposing that the age of consent should be reduced. And the National Council for Civil Liberties got involved, and Harriet Harman was the person who signed some of their responses. And she suggested that the new law could lead to damaging and absurd prosecutions. It could increase censorship. She suggested that a pornographic photo or film of a child should not be considered indecent unless it could be shown that the subject had suffered. Did you get a warm feeling out of this lady? Now, the other thing is, at the time, that the National Council for Civil Liberties was associated with two pro-paedophile organisations, Pi and Pal. So we've got an organisation associated with pro-paedophile people, and its spokesperson at the time was Harriet Harman. And this is the lady who says, well, maybe 200 people have gone through a secret court into prison. Why? Because they were trying to expose paedophilia. Something is wrong. If you look at liberty a bit more, down in the bottom right-hand box, I've obviously run out of battery power here. In the bottom right-hand box are some of the people who have been connected with this organisation, Liberty, and they're big names. Clement Attlee, Aneurin Bevan, these are the people we're supposed to be looking up to. So if they were involved in this organisation, maybe they were duped as to what it was probably doing. Bertrand Russell, some of you might know a little bit about him, because when we go down this sort of route, we start getting close to people interested in theosophical type stuff, the occult. Some of them were interested in Satanism. And Aldous Huxley, you might know the name of. If you don't, I suggest you do a bit of research, because his wife pops up And she's got involved with a charity, Children, Our Ultimate Investment. And it operates a teens and toddlers initiative. And there's a project, Caressing, which is encouraging young children to mix and touch adults. It's all there when you know where to look for this information. And the more you dig, the more you get an uneasy sense that something is being constructed, which is very sinister indeed. I think Mr. Clegg underestimated a few things. Just remember that children bit. Now here we've got Ed Balls. What a lovely man. And Mr. Balls takes himself off to Bilderberger meetings. Now, if you don't know about Bilderbergers, you should do, because the Bilderbergers were founded by the pro-Nazi movement immediately after the war. And they meet in secret. You can find this on the internet, and there's one or two really good sites. They meet in secret, and they discuss plans for world government. They just don't bother to talk to us about it, because we're the goyim, we're the cattle. But Mr. Balls goes off with a meeting. He then says, well, he attended in his private capacity, and he then charges it to the public purse. So he's either confused or he lies. Don't know which. Now, this is a press release from the Bilderbergers themselves. I just wanted to put it up to make sure that you knew that I was telling you the truth, because they say in that document that people attend in their private, not official capacity. So even the Sunday Telegraph could get pretty upset when they realised that he'd been claiming expenses on the public purse. And they got interested in the Bilderbergers talking about them themselves being a shadow world government. How many of you know that at the moment there's a committee running inside Westminster which is full of pro-world government MPs? Do you know about that? It's there, you can find it if you go looking for it. I'll help with some of the information which will go up on the website in due course, but the information's there if you ask. So while you're going about your day-to-day business, worrying about how to pay the mortgage and where the money's coming from, we've got MPs who think that they are so clever, they're going to rearrange the whole world. Well, some of them are clever, but unfortunately some of them are very dangerous people because they actually believe in themselves. So if we do a summary, come on machine, here's the Bilderbergers. First chairman was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Annual meetings, and we know at these meetings people are selected for particular positions. And there's no minutes, and they have very tight security. And we have people associated with education and children getting involved. So when in a minute I start talking about the fact they're teaching eugenics in schools, we've got something very interesting because the Nazis got involved with that. So are they doing it again? I'll let you decide. What about academy schools? Do you know about those? They've been there in the paper. We're now bringing big business in to run schools because that's the way to do it, because the public purse is broke. Well, we can print money to go to the banks, but we can't print money to run schools or run hospitals. Very strange, isn't it? It's fraud on a massive scale. But academy schools are being set up. There's about 6 in the country. And these are some of the characteristics. We know they're going to take children in at an early age. They're going to keep them to 18. The design of the buildings are interesting. Previously, our schools had big, bright, light rooms because that was uplifting and that was good for health and your mental health. These go the other way, a lot of enclosed spaces. Now, if you want to play around with people's minds, you do it in a room with no windows. But you can trust me because I've got a suit on. Therapy sessions. They are going to have they do have therapy rooms, And when you say who's going to get therapy, all the children are going to get therapy. Are you allowed in as a parent? Well, only if the therapist gives you permission. Otherwise, they have client confidentiality to the child. I was told, I'll call it a story, but I believe it is true, that a mother went to a school fairly close to me to pick up her young teenage daughter, to be told, I'm sorry, she won't be going home because we are going to section her. And the mother stood there, just stunned, to be told that her daughter had been seeing the school psychiatrist for nearly a year. But she, as the mother, had not been told. I don't know the outcome of that story yet, but I don't think it's going to be good. Who's running the schools? Industrial, military, private companies. Big ones. Vosper Thornycroft, British Aerospace is going to get involved, American companies. Why are these suddenly clustered around? Who's driving them? They're going to use a lot of Wi-Fi stuff, so the environment in that school is going to be heavily microwaved. In fact, children are going to be encouraged to carry around laptops so that they can have lessons on the move. This is all happening under your noses. And Brown and Cameron and Clegg know it's going on. I've put a lady at the bottom, Kaz, an Aussie lady. If you go and look for Kaz, Academy Schools, an Absolute Return for Kids, ARC, on YouTube. She's done some fantastic little video clips which will give you more information than I can possibly give you now. Kaz and ARC. So we did, on the right-hand side, an article about the Academy Schools in the UK column, and we will put these up on the UK column website for you so you can read what we originally wrote. And what I'm doing is bringing all this information back out into the open so that you can see the picture I'm seeing. But these are the characteristics of the school. The curriculum can be changed after a year. We know that for a fact because we've cited one of the contracts. So initially the government sets the curriculum, but after a year, the curriculum for that school is being set by a company that specialises in industrial military matters. Nice. Execution Limited is funding Absolute Return for Kids. Like the name? Dream Mill. Do you like that name? Because that's looking into behavioural change in children. And they know there's going to be behavioural change because they are going to do the things to the kids to create that change. Have you ever wondered about the 29 suicides in South Wales? Do you know about those? In a very small geographic area. What the good old BBC and the media isn't telling you is these suicide clusters are appearing in other places, particularly Northern Ireland. And the thing is that in committing suicide, the youngsters are doing things which are not normal. So, for instance, girls don't normally hang themselves. They prefer drugs or slashing their wrists. But now you're seeing people committing suicides in ways which are not the normal ways. And what it is heading towards is that these youngsters and young people are very disturbed and something's disturbing them. And it's not microwave towers, it's something that's being done to them in school, in colleges and elsewhere. I've got the project Caressing down there. I've got the teaching of eugenics, and that is absolutely correct. They are starting to teach eugenics or selective breeding in schools. And I've also at the bottom there, if you can read it, put a little bit about who's funding this. Goldman Sachs, EIM, International Asset Management, Warburgs, Citicorp, Deutsche Morgan Grenfell. These are all vast international banks who suddenly want to get very close to our children. Why? Now we got something else going on, and that is that there is a massive third sector. If some of you have heard talks that I've done on common purpose, you'll have heard me talking about the third sector. The third sector is all the quangos, charities. Do we have charities anymore? You see people going around with a little bucket collecting for something, NSPCC, whatever it is. But actually, charities are an industry. And in this country, they're worth £44 billion. And this government and advisors to this government and the Conservative government, did you see what I did with my hand there? It's creepy, isn't it? That was an accident. Basically, the third sector is being used as the new controlling sector of society. As you take power away from Parliament, that's why they're talking about getting rid of MPs. As you take power away from Parliament, it's going to go to the third sector where chosen leaders, think common purpose, are going to run things. And that's why Mr. Cameron is smugly saying, I'm going to help poor people. I'm going to take the weight of government off them. What that means is I'm going to remove MPs from Parliament. I'm going to help people by putting more money into charities and the third sector. He's not going to help them at all. That money will be used to impose the control structure for the new government. And your children are to be re-educated and re-engineered into a new society. Now, Bernardo's is a classic here because the chief executive stood up recently and said, brilliant, we must adopt more children at birth. Some children are being adopted before they're born. They're nominated for adoption before they're born. The children are taken, the baby's taken away from the mother immediately she's given birth. That's happened on numerous occasions. And this man, chief executive of charity, says we need more babies taken at birth. What he doesn't say is he effectively provides consultancy. So the more babies that come into the world that he can get his hands on, the more money Bernardo's makes. So the next time the little pot comes around with Bernardo's, just think a bit deeper about what that organisation's doing. And the bottom statement is John Hemmings, who got a bit hot under the collar and said this man doesn't really know what he's talking about. But I tell you, he does know what he's talking about because he's into the money for children business, or children for money. And this is all going on under our noses. The BBC's involved. And they've done at least one major programme where they're after parents. And I challenged them, and they got pretty heavy in a meeting in Plymouth. And when I asked, do you know the children are willingly given up for adoption, they were advertised. I'll come over here. This is a magazine where they're showing photos of children and advertising them, just like puppies. But the BBC got a bit stroppy, so we started digging. Now, common purpose is there. I'm not going to go too heavy on common purpose because it's a whole subject, but this is the doorway to their London headquarters. It doesn't say anything. And that's because they're doing a lot behind the scenes, particularly behavioural modification. And they are going into schools in a very big way, and they're going into social services. Can I prove what I'm saying? Everything. So that's a little snapshot of Wales for you. Interesting, isn't it? Common purpose is amongst the social services, and we got problems with people. And this one is my favourite because about 3 years ago I started to warn about paedophiles involved with common purpose because common purpose runs secret networks. And here we've got James Rennie, recently sentenced. He was abusing children as young as 3 months in Scotland. He was a common purpose trained person. He was selected for that training by a common purpose advisory board. On that board was a senior police officer who later formed the same police force that arrested him for paedophilia. 30th of October, Common Purpose was still proudly boasting his Facebook on one of their internal websites. And this organisation goes into school to train your children. We are using neurolinguistics on the police, and the police are involved with children. Let's talk some cases. This is a lady up in Liverpool. She had 3 children. She was in the park one day. A small motorbike came up onto the grass and hit one of her boys, broke his arm, damaged his leg, and he was duly taken to hospital, where as a responsible mum, she stayed by his bedside for 3 days, while the other 2 children went to her mother. At the end of the 3rd day, she'd been away, gone to the loo or something, came back, and there's a big group of people around the bed, about 8 of them, doctors and people in plain clothes. And they said to her, Mrs. Spallak, we're going to take your son. We're going to take your children. She said, what are you talking about? Well, we've got reason to say